Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning and welcome to the special council meeting in Qualicum Beach. The agenda is slightly different. That after the first item, which is the planning and community development, we're going into a committee of the whole. So that means we don't accept comments from the gallery during the regular meeting, or special meeting, but you can during the committee of the whole on certain items. So any changes to the agenda? Councillor Harrison.
Just one thing, Your Worship, just through the chair to staff. Given that for number 6, we're not supposed to have any discussion, should we maybe bump up the public input opportunity prior to number 6? Just so that way there's no overlap and folks don't have to wait through the residential proposition prior to giving their feedback.
Well, on number 6, we don't accept comments. Councillor, so what was your request?
Oh, just that for things like the asset management and the museum presentation, if folks wanted to discuss those two, we'd basically bump it up so that it's prior to the presentation on the residential development, because folks can't really talk about that anyways. And that way, if folks want to talk about the asset management, they can have that opportunity right away. Or are we just sort of doing it after each item for
after each item? Yeah. Councillor Young.
Out of respect to the delegations, some of them are volunteers, and for their time, I would like to see that the discussion on the quality of life survey to be at the end, and number 4, 5, and 6 bumped up.
I would suggest that the Historical Society, Museum Historical Society, are at the top of the committee of the whole meeting. Yes, Ms. Svensson.
Sorry, Your Worship, we have to deal with quality of life survey first because we're in a special council meeting. Then we're resolving to committee of the whole. We do have the museum as the first delegation.
That's right. That's what I just said. So I think we're okay. So any other changes to the agenda? Then the agenda is adopted by consent. And the first item is planning and community development. Mr. Sales. Oh, sorry. I want to wish you a very happy and prosperous new year, and that we are holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The first item on the agenda this morning is the draft quality of life survey, which has been prepared with input from the Official Community Plan Review Steering Committee and input from committee members and residents associations. The Quality of Life Survey is a key engagement tool that will inform the upcoming 2025 Official Community Plan Review. It also provides residents the opportunity to provide feedback on the town's current service delivery in multiple areas. The consulting contract for this work has been awarded to Deloitte LLP late last year by Council, and the intention is to distribute this survey next week, and it would be open for approximately 3 to 4 weeks. The Official Community Plan Review work plan, the review work plan and an engagement strategy will be presented at an upcoming council meeting. So today's meeting is focusing solely on the first part, which is the quality of life survey. I should also note that the strategic initiative entitled Ways to Achieve Affordable Market Housing will also be detailed in that upcoming work plan. And I should make a note that the word affordable is missing in the staff memo, so the strategic initiative is titled Ways to Achieve Affordable Market Housing, and so that's the complete title. So the draft survey questions you have before you have been reviewed multiple times. The consultant has reviewed them for statistical validity and to ensure that the questions aren't biased or leading to our residents. So at this point, we are requesting that council consider, and the recommendation is endorse the draft survey questions so that they can be given to the consultant for potential issuance next week. Thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Councillor Young.
I would like the opportunity to go over all of us, each individual question before it goes any further.
Which question would you like to start with?
Number 9, regarding the nonprofit organizations and our satisfaction level. I think that I would like to see the baseball, softball, soccer association split up into 3 different organizations. Also, when it comes to some of the nonprofit organizations, if they're receiving a fee for service, I would like an asterisk by those nonprofit organizations, because I believe if we give fee for service, we are expecting more. And I would like that to be noted on those organizations that do get a fee for service from our town.
Thank you. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So those three activities could potentially be split up. Baseball and softball logically share a lot of things, so maybe those would be combined, but soccer could be separated into a separate category. I would note that this list is already fairly lengthy, and it would be complicated to describe fully exactly what the financial relationship is with each of these items. So for example, the baseball and soccer associations don't receive any money from the town, and whereas the Chamber of Commerce has a fee for service, the police is taxed directly. The Qualicum Commons is owned by the school district, so that's another realm of taxation separately. So there's a lot of nuance, and I think to fully describe all the financial details would make the survey list too complicated. So I don't know that it would add value to the information that we're going to get in response to this survey. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment on that particular point? Okay, so if you want to make a motion, we can consider that. Otherwise, it stays the way it is. Councilor Young.
It's been suggested to me by one of the nonprofit organizations if they could have an asterisk by the ones that do get a fee for service, because they do ask the town to provide funding for specific things, and we ought to see that they're receiving the extra support and that whether or not we're satisfied.
Mr. Sales, would that be a reasonable addition for information-wise?
It's something that could be referred to the consultant if they feel it's appropriate. When I'm looking at the list, there are other nuances that I feel like would also need to be included, like whether they're taxed directly or whether it's a lease that someone's paying for, whether it's a lease that someone's not paying for. That's another distinction I forgot to mention. So for example, the Memorial Golf Course pays a substantial lease to the town every year. Should that be noted as well? Right, so the financial relationship, I don't know, really impacts the response as to whether people are generally satisfied. And also, it's important to note that the response to this question doesn't necessarily indicate whether a service is done well or not. It indicates whether or not there needs to be further discussion. So for example, if a response to one of these categories indicates that residents are not satisfied with that service, my suggestion would be that it warrants further discussion. Council should determine exactly why that is, maybe through in-person engagement. This survey is just intended to flag areas where further investigation is required. So if council feels strongly, we can refer it to the consultant, but the recommendation is to keep it as is. Thank you.
I think there is some merit to it, and I think it would be good to discuss it with the consultant to see if that would be easily fixed. Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if we're looking at identifying fee for service, there's a couple then that aren't on the list, and one would be the Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Region hosts the Brant Festival annually, and that is a fee for service, as well as the Legion. We give a fairly substantial amount to the Legion to host the Remembrance Day, the New Year's celebration, and as well as Canada Day. So perhaps those should be included if we're looking at identifying fee for services.
We'll take it under consideration. Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Harrison.
There's a bunch. So one of the first ones is just for the very first question, where it says, under 18, thank participant in closed survey. Is there any way we could get parental consent? I'm just thinking if like there was a mail-in parental consent. I actually think there's a value in getting some of that feedback from some of the youngest members of our community, and to have it automatically closed, I think it personally rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I can understand if there's a legal reason for it, so be it, that's what it is. But if there would be a way where we could do almost like please get consent from your parent to participate in the survey, and when we receive that, then maybe there's a paper version. I'm not sure if that's possible or not.
What we have done in the past, we've gone to the schools and have a presentation, so they don't just get a piece of paper and trying to figure it out. They actually get a presentation on the issues that they're concerned about and talk to them about it. That's a valid and very helpful way for us to get feedback from the younger part of our community without them having to go through the whole process of filling out these forms. And it's a more lively discussion where they may feel more comfortable under the leadership of their own classroom teacher and work with us on what they see for the future is important to them.
Fair point. So is that something, just through the chair to staff, that we'll be undertaking?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison, staff have already reached out to the high school, and so we are intending to do an in-person engagement. Thank you.
Okay. Not perfect, but that's pretty good. Next one is actually literally the next question. So we have the quality of life. How would you rate quality of life? Excellent, fair, good, poor. Just one suggestion I have is that we add like a little small question after that, where you just have a blank space and you add one word that best describes Qualicum Beach. No prompt. And the idea is you're creating a word cloud. So in the previous quality of life survey, the 2018, we had a list of about 12 different words that, village, atmosphere, friendly community, things like that. I just think it'd be very interesting to see what that sort of word cloud, we're all familiar with that with presentations and PowerPoints where you have that big, and the most commonly used one is slightly larger font. But I think that might be very interesting to see what some of those patterns are. And then because we're not prompting anything, we'd actually be getting useful feedback, I think. So if people say too busy or something like that, okay, well then we know. If people say fine the way it is, we know. And if people say needs to something else, then we know.
From my experience, folks in this town aren't backwards coming forward what they actually think. And they write it out. So we can encourage them to do that, but I think that's almost a foregone conclusion that they will let us know what they think of the town before we prompt them with anything that we may think they should consider.
And then just number 10. So we have, to what extent do you agree that the town of Qualicum Beach is taking the right action to consider the future needs of the community? Strongly, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree. Again, this is another area where I think we'd benefit from an open field. And the question would be, what actions are needed to be undertaken by the town and what actions are appreciated by the town? So if you strongly agree we're doing a great job, what specifically are we doing really well? If you think we're doing a poor job, what specifically are we missing? Because I do think that in this area, there might be some really interesting feedback that strongly disagree with what. And I'm not certain we'd get that information otherwise.
I think I agree. I think if we could have a sentence saying, please articulate your views, that would be helpful. Councilor, Mr. Sales?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. To address that question, we have discussed this with the consultant. So some of these questions are used to assemble what they call composite scores and composite responses. So in other words, this question gets combined with responses to other questions to have like implied importance. So the consultant feels that that's the most statistically valid way to determine areas of concern and areas of support. So the questions combine. So this specific one was added by the consultant because it's one that they typically use in quality of life surveys to assess essentially what you're asking. So rather than explicitly asking it, it's implied through the other questions in this portion of the survey.
Which questions do this link to, if I may? My apologies for not giving you the question beforehand. Sorry, this is a complicated question. You can email me later, maybe, if you don't have it immediately before you, because.
Yeah, but I kind of agree with you, because when you go through all these questions, you may lose your train of thought and say, okay, I should have responded to that as to why I agree or disagree strongly, whatever. Is to have a comment explaining that. I think while you're doing it, you must think about how to respond, and then why you would respond that way. So I think to connect that right away, I think is fair comment. I agree with Councilor Harrison that question is fair by asking also, can you articulate your views and why you indicate what you did? Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Van der Valk? Yes.
Mayor Westbrook, so I think I'm making notes, and I'm sure there are other staff people making notes too, but it would be really helpful for clear council direction on each one of these. So in other words, if we're provided with some feedback, at the end of today's meeting, we need clear direction as to which are directed changes and which are suggestions and which are referrals to the consultant. So if council is able to provide that clarity, that would be great. Thank you.
I invite a motion to add the point that you're trying to raise earlier. Go ahead.
And I think I should let other people go. I have a couple more.
No, make an amendment to this particular one.
Okay, just for the specific one. The staff could change the language if they want, but it's just saying what actions need to be improved or what actions are appreciated by yourself. Sort of getting a sense of what are we doing well or what are we doing poorly if you have a very strong opinion either way.
Right. Would it be suffice to say, can you articulate your point of view?
That'd be lovely.
Thank you. So that's a motion. I'll second that. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed or any carried? Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, I had a number of comments. I'll make a few of them. I had a question right from the beginning. Each survey will have 2 codes, and I'm wondering what happens if there's more than 2 people living in the home and 3 or 4 people want to fill out the survey.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the survey can be filled out by more than 2 people. It's just that only 2 of them are considered in the statistically valid weighting. I should also note that the average household size in the town is 2. So on average, we would be catching the majority. And if there are children in the house, they wouldn't be invited to fill out the survey anyway. If there's multiple adults, more than 2, then they could fill it out anyway, just without a code. Thank you.
Okay, and then I think at one time there had been a motion from the Parks and Recreation Committee, which was approved by council, that the committee have the opportunity to review any questions that are related to Parks and Recreation on the quality of life survey, and I just wondered if that would be happening.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. So every committee member in every committee was invited to provide input on, on survey questions. So when staff looked at the logistics of assembling every committee to specifically review the draft survey, within the timeline, it wasn't feasible. So they were provided an opportunity for input. Thank you.
We'll go with Councillor Vandervalk.
Everybody gets their turn. I just had a comment about the map, and don't have the page number. Page number 14. I find this map a little confusing and difficult because the areas are so large, and there are really areas within those areas that may or may not be applicable for what we're trying to accomplish. So I don't know how else that could be done, but I think definitely it needs to be more clear as to what areas we're looking at or what areas people think would be appropriate for housing.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So there's 2 responses to that question. The first is that in previous quality of life surveys, we have described it differently. So rather than using a map, it was verbal descriptions such as, north of the railway and east of Memorial Avenue. And people found that confusing. So the map was an intention to clarify it a little bit. The second response is similar to a response I've likely given for other questions, and that is that responses to this are not votes. It's not a referendum on whether development should be approved. It's an indicator as to whether further discussion is required. So, as an example, the point is very valid. Like, extensive development in the ALR is likely not a consideration. But if people did identify C as an area where where the residents wanted to see multifamily housing, I think it would warrant a discussion. So in other words, in the upcoming OCP review, that's something we should discuss in the in-person engagement. So it's not a vote for or against development, it's just an indication as to whether development or whether discussion is warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervalk.
So further to that, or related to that, is the fact that the reason why we're doing this OCP review within this time frame is because of the new legislation, which calls for gentle densification within single-family residential areas. So if people aren't aware of that, or if people say, well, no, I'm not interested in residential development, let's say in Chartwell or Eagle Crest, for example, then that is counter to the provincial legislation. So I don't know that we're really getting ahead in terms of understanding where people want to see development, because that's been provincially legislated.
That's a fair comment, where we invite responses that are not practical because of the legislation. And you also mentioned earlier, not today, earlier, but before other meetings, that we are quite advanced on the legislation requirements. Perhaps you can articulate what that means and how that affects the entire community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So I just note specifically to this question before I answer the second one, in that when we discussed this one with the OCP Review Steering Committee, there were mixed opinions as to whether this question adds value. So there's always an option to council. If council feels it's confusing, we can delete the question. So that is an option before you today. I wouldn't say it's the most insightful of the questions in this survey. So that option exists. Just further to your direct question, when we look at the housing needs report, interim housing needs report, which was provided to the town late last year by a consultant, it identifies that the town will need approximately 2,500 new dwellings over the next 20 years. And as you know, Mayor Westbrook, that through the required upzoning of residential lots, the actual number of increased density has already exceeded that threshold identified by the province. So the question is, when we do the OCP review, is how do we get the types of housing that we need? It's not just an overall numbers game. We need to look at the specific types of housing we need. So that's a little bit of a side note, and it will be detailed later in more detail through the engagement plan. Thank you.
Councillor Van der Valk, for you, one more follow-up.
Sorry, I'm out of practice since in the new year. Well, I would like to make a motion that question be deleted, because I don't really think that we can pinpoint the areas. For example, if people were to say, yes, I think this should happen in C, and again, it's not, if it is ALR land, I don't know that it will bring up the right discussions. So I would make a motion that we delete that question.
Okay, so your motion is to delete that question, and just for clarification, the number of the question again?
24.
Question 24, and Councillor Skippy, you were seconding that? Discussion. Councillor Young.
I agree that it should be deleted. Also got an email from one of a very engaged resident. She mentioned that why would anyone build residential in non-residential areas and protected areas?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harrison.
I think this is something where I totally understand where council is coming from, but I do think we might want to have some variation of a question that talks about where would you like to see different types of housing. But I do agree that the way we've got it set up right now will create some false expectations. I can just see someone saying, duplexes in Area C, my God, they're tearing down these state properties. And so, we don't want to let people think that we're doing something we're actually not trying to do here. But we might want to, by all means, get rid of this question, but also have some discussion with the consultant about what is a question that would elicit the sort of information this was supposed to get. And maybe we go back to the 2018 iteration where it's more of a verbal association, which is still a bit confusing, but we have maps at Town Hall. If folks are confused, they can ask us. Because I think there's a good question here, it's just not in its current iteration.
Right. And I think you were at some of the town hall type meetings at the Civic Center, which were very well attended, about housing, and this issue will be discussed. So I think we can leave it at that. This may be a bit confusing, so I agree with the motion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt. I thought you were looking out.
No, motion carried, so that question is gone. Thank you. Next question. Councillor Van der Valk.
I just had a question on page 28. on page 15, rather, in the town's role in housing, whether it might be prudent to not necessarily ask a different question, but just let people know or clarify that housing really isn't within our jurisdiction. It's a provincial issue. And so anything that we are doing regarding housing is sort of above and beyond what we normally would be asked to do. So just a clarification about that.
Mr. Sales, clarification on question number 28.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I think there could be some additional wording here, something to the effect that, the town has limited direct control over the provision of housing, however, and then ask the question. So if staff can work on that and provide a little bit more clarity, I think we could add to the question.
Okay. Councillor Skipsey?
Well, I would support doing that because I think, when we look at our budgets and our director of finance puts up the thing that says, this is what local governments are mandated to do, this is outside of our jurisdiction, and housing is one of those things. So I think it should be clear that it's not necessarily our mandate to provide housing, but that, if we choose to have a role in it, then that's fine. But I think it should be clear to our taxpayers.
So as far as clarification, do you need a motion to direct that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook.
Okay, could I have a motion to, Councillor Tannenwald, make the motion.
I move that the quality of life survey on point 28 have clarification as to the town's role or that the province has jurisdiction over housing.
Okay, that's your motion, and it'll be seconded by Councillor Skipsey. Discussion. Councillor Harrison.
The problem is that it's not quite true. We could, it's just eye-wateringly expensive and would blow up our budget. So could we do it? Sure. Could we build the railway project on our own? Sure, but it was $10 million capital at below market rates to lend to build it, and it's a $313,000 operating subsidy for 60 years, which comes to $30 million with 2% increase in interest. So $40 million bucks is a lot of money for a small town. Legally, I think we could, but practically, I don't think we could. So I think we want to be careful when we say legally we can't do this. I don't think there's a lot of appetite for taxes to go up like 15, 20%, and we become a parallel of BC housing. I don't think there's any appetite for that, but I just be cautious about this because I'm not sure it's technically, from what I recall, the section of the community charter called purposes. I don't think there's anything which is explicit where we couldn't do something if we wanted to. It's just no one wants to because it's so very, very, very expensive to do so.
Okay, well, I actually don't quite agree, and I think you've heard my comments before. We have town-owned land at the airport, and I spoke with Larson's some time ago, and there are opportunities to create small lots, and I mean very small lots like the one you see next to Angel Court, where it's a very tiny lot, but there's going to be fourplex there. So there are opportunities to build on very small lots, and having them out there, town-owned land, we can create those properties and sell them for a very reasonable price with conditions. They can't flip them, and they're not intended for people who live there in the summer and then in the winter go to Arizona. These are for people who, and we can make that work through a non-profit organization, where somebody could own that piece of land and build a modular home or a mobile home or some kind of small home that they can afford, but at least be in the market. And that's something that we don't need the province's assistance with. This is something that I think we should have tried some time ago when I think I brought this up a couple of years ago. And I think that's still an opportunity. So I think the question may not be exactly right, but I think I'd like to hear people's thoughts on it. Councillor Young, I'm going to come back to you. Councillor Young.
I want clarification. I thought we were discussing question 27 and not 28. But if we are discussing number 28, then I think it's an important question because it takes about 3 years to build something. And so to ask people what they might be doing in the next 5 years or what they hope to move into in the next 5 years, it's important for us to know so that we can look to making developments in those areas.
Yes, and we are discussing 28, right? That's the one you make the motion on. Okay, further discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so I just had 2 notes here. There's additional things which I know there's an other already in that, but one would be public-private partnerships for direct investment, so a PPE. Again, I don't recommend it because it's eye-wateringly expensive for a small town. But if folks really wanted us to be the most aggressive small town in Vancouver Island, your taxes will go up, we could do that. Where basically you would partner, say, with a multi-unit thing and say, okay, we'll buy down the difference from the market rate to make it affordable. It's a lot of money. I don't recommend it. The other thing would be looking at establishing partnerships with nonprofits. There's a wide number of nonprofits that provide affordable housing. So things like RFEIs, MOUs. There's things where we can start building relationships with nonprofits. I'm not sure if we want to have that as one of the things, but those are just the 2 things where it's a PPE collaboration or establishing relationships with nonprofits as other things we could have on that list. But I'm not sure what staff think. I think that's maybe something that we get feedback from the consultant on.
Okay. Mr. Sales, any comment?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. This question started off with more options with the OCP Review Steering Committee, and they found them too confusing because even amongst the group that was very familiar with housing, some of them, like the PPE or the triple P option that you described, even they were a bit confused about it. So we eliminated it as an option, added the other category. So if someone is aware of what it is, they can write it in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on this item? Councillor Vanderwall.
So I'm still not clear on the motion that I made. I think maybe I need to hear the wording.
Okay, Ms. Winston.
Because
Councillor Vandervalk moved and Councillor Skipsey seconded that staff be directed to add additional clarity to question number 28, outlining the province having jurisdiction over housing in Qualicum Beach.
Okay, sound good? All right, are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried, thank you. Councillor Young.
Going to question number 27, just above that, it was also brought to my attention by another engaged resident that perhaps we should also consider giving doctors housing as a draw to get doctors in our community. I'd also like to see option for people to weigh in on having possibly the town having templates for carriage houses, so it makes things more affordable for people to do add-ons or to increase their residential capacity. And then another one to say that all of the above, this is again a suggestion from another resident, that all of the classes of households are deserving some degree of housing support. So if we could also include those 3 things.
Mr. Sales, I'm sure your committee discussed that.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the doctors didn't come up as a discussion point. It's just not typically an item that's described in an affordable housing oriented question. So this question was provided by the consultant. It was reviewed by the committee. In terms of templates, there is a council strategic initiative in a future year to develop, I think, exactly the templates that you described. So that is already something that the town is intending to do. The last thing about providing all of the above, the intention of this question is not to determine whether residents think there is a need, but to help the town prioritize which of them are most supported by the residents. So if the answer was all of the above, it essentially wouldn't provide any useful information in terms of prioritizing those responses. Thank you.
Right, I think Councillor Young really was focusing on providing homes for our medical service providers, whether it's doctors, nurse practitioners, and so on. So that would be one particular point that could be added. If there's a seconder. Councillor Skipsey. That is the motion. Councillor, Ms. Svensson, is, what was your motion to add the title medical service providers? Okay, thank you. That was seconded. Councillor Van der Valk and Councillor Harrison. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a comment that I don't know that we want to be separating out different occupations or professions. That person, that doctor, will likely be a senior or a young person or a family with children or a one-person household. So I don't really see the point. We could say maybe in 10 years we'll have or 5 years we'll have a shortage of lawyers, and should we provide housing for lawyers? So I don't know that we want to specify who we're providing housing for.
Okay, but that is the motion. Councillor Harrison.
I actually disagree with this question altogether. I think it pits people against each other. The reality is the funding programs provide clarity as to who's getting the supports. So when you apply the Community Housing Fund, it mixes together low-income seniors with young families, a priority in the RFP. You have to do that to get the funds for the project. So I think there's really, if we're not looking at the funding streams, then this is just a very hypothetical question. I think we're much better served actually not even having this question. We know there are a lot of vulnerable groups we need to support, and instead it should be looking at how much do you want us to actually see these projects move forward. And if you're going to have a conversation, here's the actual BC housing funding streams where you can actually get money to actually build something, not here's the 2 groups we've identified that we want to help, and then what does it say to all the other groups who aren't selected then? Because if I was a one-person household or a family with children and I'm at the bottom of the list, I don't think that creates a good impression. So I know the intent is to try to prioritize what we're trying to do, but I do think the question becomes very divisive very quickly, and I'd feel badly for the folks at the bottom of the list.
All right, so the motion is about adding healthcare providers. That's the motion. That's for the amendment. So are you ready for that question? All in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. So the thought was to get rid of the in question. Are you inclined to make a motion to eliminate this question?
Well, I was just going to ask, just through the chair to staff, what they thought. Like, is this something where, how exactly does this elicit feedback that results in actions is sort of my concern.
Mr. Sales?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So ultimately, it would be council to decide whether or not they want to proceed with housing that advances any of these particular user groups. The information that the town will get from this question is not necessarily which groups need support. That's being answered through other means, such as the housing needs report. So in terms of a quantitative kind of fact-based analysis, that's already been provided to the town. What this indicates is residents' perception of that need, and so I think that that's informative in a slightly different way, and so that's why it's in here. It's not necessarily to flag like these are the ones that need the most attention, because that has been answered. You can do that statistically. It's to give some insight into the way that our residents perceive the need for housing. So if council doesn't see value in the question, it can be deleted, but I just wanted to describe that was the overall intent. Thank you.
You okay with that?
I don't know. I still feel that if we know the answer to the question already, then why are we asking the question of the public? And if public doesn't align with the facts, then it falls to us to share the information so that they're aware of the facts. So,
well, I invite you to make a motion.
Yeah, I would make a motion to actually remove this question. Sorry, I've been talking too long.
Yeah. And the second, Councillor Skipsey, discussion. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
I wanted to go back to question number 25, areas for protection. And the question is, are there any non-residential areas within the town that you want to see protected from becoming residential? And I wonder if that should just be an open question rather than trying to select an area. That doesn't really make sense because you're selecting a whole area. You're not selecting a specific part of that.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if we could leave that one as an open-ended question.
Make the motion.
Okay, that question number 25 be revised to be an open-ended question.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And Ms. Svensson, I should have asked, did you get the intended motion? Thank you. Next question. I thought we were working towards the end, but it looked like we're going. Councillor Van der Valk.
Page 17, question 31. I'm just thinking it might be beneficial to at least highlight the word uptown in Qualicum Beach so that it's clear that we're looking specifically at that area.
I had that underlined as well, and just the only question would be, would the average respondent know exactly what uptown is delineated? Is it the red area in our OCP for the commercial section, or is it the surrounding mixed commercial, residential, or village neighborhood? What's the boundary?
Mr. Seals?
Thank you. I think both of those points are well taken. I think we could add some clarity, say maybe parentheses, commercial core, or something to that effect. That would be more descriptive. Thank you.
There's a bit of a history to that. Before we had the new Island Highway, if you drove along the old Island Highway, a lot of people didn't know that we had this area uptown. But you had to go uphill, uptown to see the commercial core. So that was kind of a part of the history of Qualicum Beach. But since we have the new Island Highway, it's actually going downtown. So that could be confusing. Anyway, I think if we clarify it, that'll be fine. Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Forgive me. I know staff did a very vibrant amount of outreach on accessibility when we were doing our accessibility plan. But I just going to pose to staff, would there be any value, maybe after question 17, when we're talking about community safety, if we have a question, are there any areas of town that you or your family members have a difficult time accessing? And it'd be things like small businesses, maybe certain sidewalks, but it's an open-ended question, so folks can put in what they want. I'm just wondering, just through the chair to staff, would there be any benefit to that, or do you feel like we've already done, because we have done a lot of outreach already, so I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, but this will have a broader number of respondents, is the reason I just asked the question.
Mr. Seals?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. The outreach, we have done extensive outreach, so we do have some pretty good input on that. The question could be added, certainly. And there may be people that respond to this survey because it goes to every household in town. So if council makes a motion, there'd be no concerns with adding that question.
If I may, Your Worship, then, just to suggest, oh, sorry, Ms. Svensson.
Sorry, just for clarity, to go back to the previous one, did you want a motion for clarifying number 31, articulating uptown?
Yes, I thought that was kind of a given, but there was no motion made on that.
Yeah.
It was just discussion.
Okay, would you like a motion?
There was no motion, unless there is one. But like I said, it could be confusing when we go downtown now. Councillor Van der Valk.
Yeah, I'll make the motion that there be clarification that we are looking at the uptown area and delineating where that uptown area is.
Okay, and that's seconded by Councillor Harrison. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. I just move that an additional question is posed with an open-ended response. Are there any areas of town that you or your family members have a difficult time accessing?
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey seconding that discussion. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Young.
On this question, why is there only a limit to check off 5? I think there's lots of options here, and I think many of them warrant justification.
Mr. Seals?
For clarity, which question, through the chair to Councillor Young, which question are you referring to?
My apologies. I've been giving a different draft on this OCP survey, so my numbers are out of sync. Sorry.
It's in the agenda package. That's the one we're going by.
This is my agenda package,
Oh.
but my numbers are different.
Really?
Sorry, just for clarity, if I may, Your Worship. This is basically a new question, so just, it's not referring to an
I know,
existing
but the
one. Yeah.
questions, according to Councillor Young, are different in her package. Yeah. But anyway, your motion is, and Councilor, Ms. Svensson, did you get the motion, Ms. Councilor Harrison?
Yes, Your Worship. I just was wishing for clarity on who seconded the motion. Thank you.
Councilor Skipsey?
Yes, thank you. So moved, Councillor Harrison, seconded, Councillor Skipsey, that additional question be asked in the draft quality of life survey. Are there any areas of town that you or your family are having issues accessing?
Yeah. All right, further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Councilor Harrison.
I'm not sure if this can be done, but it's something I know of. I follow Civic Info. It's a I hate saying X, but it is what used to be Twitter. The City of Quesnel has a budget process where they're doing a survey, and they have a question where they allow you to say, if you're going to spend more money on taxes, here's 4 or 5 areas, and we have sliders. And now I know we can't do sliders, but I was thinking, just through the chair to staff, would there be any benefit if we say you have X amount of dollars to invest, and we have things like infrastructure, affordable housing, climate change mitigation, and adaptation, healthcare, nothing, my taxes are too high as it is, and then let people basically select 0, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%, and they sort of have the ability to say, I want my taxes to go to these areas. It's very inelegant, and it's kind of last minute. I'm just wondering, though, is there any way we could do that, or is that something that you think is a bad idea?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So certainly that's not a bad idea. I've seen that used successfully in participatory budget processes. I think asking it in this particular format and this particular survey might be an odd fit, but I would certainly, I think it warrants discussion, in other aspects of the overall year, like maybe during budget next year, we could do that.
That's an excellent point, Mr. Sales. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do it during the budget process. Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Skipsey.
Well, mine kind of related to that as well, around finances, and that was an email that we received when people realized that they weren't going to be able to speak to this. We received a couple of emails. I think it was a little bit confusing because it was on the agenda, and then there was an opportunity to talk, but hopefully most people have let their thoughts be known if they have strong opinions. But there was also a question around finances, and like later today during the agenda, we're going to be having a presentation around asset replacement financing and what people want, direction council's going to go, whether we put more money into it and have less risk, or whether we put less money and then increase the risk. And I just think, the quality of life survey only comes around once every 5 years or so, and that maybe this is an opportunity to kind of get a temperature from our residents on that.
It may be, but I think the timing would be off. By the time we get the results of this quality of service, our financial plan would have been already completed. So I think it's a good thing to do during our financial planning. But during putting it in there now, by the time it goes out and comes back for feedback, it'll be kind of after the fact, and I think that's not helpful. So I would leave it alone for now. Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor Harrison.
Just a couple more. So number 18, airport services. I'm just wondering, what is the information we're trying to elicit from this question where it says, which 3 do you find the most important, I believe is the question.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. So this is one of those questions where there are implied importance and satisfaction. So in another part of the survey, it talks about general satisfaction and quality of life. So when you combine questions like this with questions there, it gives the consultant some insight as to which areas affect people's quality of life, right? So there's some quantitative analysis there. In terms of prioritizing, I think it's, I would find it helpful as we do planning for the airport to find out which areas or which airport activities are the most highly valued by our residents and which ones perhaps are lower down the list.
The only reason I sort of raise that is I'm not sure for things like the Qualicum Beach Flying Club, people understand what the benefit is. They'd understand things like scheduled flight service, Aerosmith search and rescue. Most folks would get that air ambulance. That makes sense. But I have a hunch we're going to get those 3 responses for like 90% of residents. And I could be wrong, so I'm just not sure how useful the response is going to be.
Okay. Unless there's a motion forthcoming, we'll leave it as it is. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Young, any further comments? On anything?
On this one regarding the airport, can we, instead of just choosing 3 options, can we number it in order of preference on what we would like to see at the airport?
If you make a motion, we can consider it.
I will make that motion to have a priority on numbering our options that we choose.
All right, Ms. Svensson, is that a clear motion? Okay, and it's seconded by Councillor Harrison. Discussion? Councillor Harrison.
Could we just maybe ask staff, do you think that would provide maybe a little bit more clarity? Because I think the benefit to this system is the 4th and 5th options will actually start showing up. The downside is I think after the 4th or 5th, people might not know what to rank.
I think they'll say the quietest ones. Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the result of the question, the way it's worded now, will be an ordered list, because depending on the number of people that include, say, scheduled flights in their top 3, council will receive an ordered list out of this. When it comes to ranking, the consultant, I think, shares the experience that I've had personally, and that sometimes it's a bit confusing to fill out the surveys, and then you go down the list and oh shoot, I already used my number 1, and then you have to reorder. So it can be a bit more tedious to fill out, and the way it's asked now will essentially yield the same result.
Okay. Councillor Harrison.
And the other problem too is whenever you do ranking, if every survey is ordered the same way, usually for a survey you'd want to have 2 or 3 different orders. And that might create more surveys, so I can see how logistically it gets a little bit tricky. Yeah, I'm not sure if I support this, and the more I think about it, but it's a good debate.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that council, with the support of staff, has an open mind to this. This is an important feature of our OCP review. Every time we do this, we count on people to respond. And last time, I think we sent out 3,500 questionnaires, and we got 2,000 of them back. It's like, I think the last time was 35 questions, 15 pages, and people took the time to respond to that. So this is very important. That's why we're having this discussion, to make sure that council is comfortable that we're asking the right questions the right way. So any other questions? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so just one thing too for numbers 29 and 30.
So there was a motion on the floor.
Oh, sorry, there was a motion. My apologies.
Yeah,
You're right. Sorry.
So any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. Thank you. Go ahead.
So sorry, Your Worship. Just for 29 and 30, one option which isn't included is living at home with supports. So we have a lot of folks, about a quarter of our population is 75 or older. And so when we're saying, where do you see yourself living in 5 years? I think there might be need for a question where it says something like, I'm not planning on moving, provided I'm given support. So some sort of VIHA care aid coming in, or a private sector care aid coming in. I think it's also, too, the advantage to that is if we get a lot of people saying, this is what I want, then we'll be able to go to VIHA and say, this is how many people you're going to need to hire. So I do think it's something that's going to be a really important bottleneck in our region in the next decade. So I just suggest that we add one more bubble for under I am not planning on moving, I am not planning on moving provided I am provided additional supports. Or something to that effect. If staff could maybe do a better version of that. My apologies if I'm getting the wording wrong.
Okay, Ms. Svensson, does that sound reasonable as a motion? Okay, if I have a seconder for that. Councilors Van der Valk, discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Who has another question? Councilor Young.
Going to number 11. On to what extent do you agree the town of Qualicum Beach is moving in the right direction for each of its long-term sustainability principles? I would like to see under each of the headings that these items are separated.
What's your...
And then the question is applied to each of the different little subheadings.
I'm not sure you want question 11.
Like, for
broken
instance,
up in-
under transportation, we should separate it with subtitles, walking and cycling trails, improving crosswalks. It shouldn't all be lumped into one category. I think all of the different items that are mentioned under the different topics should be individually itemized.
Thank you. Mr. Seals?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Young. So those items are not, it's not a complete list. Those are just examples of some of the types of things that are included in that category. So if the intention was to provide a complete list, I think we would need time to analyze exactly what those were. So as an example, there are other aspects to the transportation network in addition to just the walking and cycling trails, crosswalks, and network of infrastructure, and network of transportation routes.
Thank you. So if you want to change something, you need to make a motion, Councillor Young, and then we can consider it.
I was just hoping that this way, from this survey.
No, you need to make a motion. if you
Okay,
want
I
to
will
change.
make the motion to have more clarity in individualizing the different subtopics of the major topics.
Okay. Is there a second for that? No second, then that's it for that one. Any other questions?
Okay, also on that question, then I'd like to see forest management added on.
Sorry, forest management?
Forest management and viewing all decisions through a climate change lens.
So what is your motion? Did you want to add another item
Yes.
of forest management? Okay. Mr. Seals, what are your thoughts on adding that bullet?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. If I might suggest, that would be a potential example under healthy ecosystems. If we could, if forest management is an important item to add, we could add that as an example of the type of activity under healthy ecosystems.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councillor Harrison, there's no motion.
Oh, sorry.
If there's no motion, we don't have to debate it. Go ahead.
I was just going to suggest that if we wanted to do that, I know we have a preliminary number for tree coverage, but if you had something where you say, this is where we're at, I think one issue in our community on this issue of how many trees do we have, there's some people feel like where we're starting from isn't universally known, is what I'm trying to get at. And I'm sure there's a variety of opinions on where we should go. That's perfectly well and good. But if we're going to do that as a question, we should maybe have some factual information of this is our starting point, and then from there, where do you want us to go?
Mr. Seals?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I would note that the tree bylaw is up for review this year, and that's a level of detail I think we'd want to get to in that process, not necessarily here. So this is a general indicator of where our residents' priorities are in relation to these general sustainability initiatives. So it doesn't provide the level of specificity that question would, but I think we'll get to that in a later process.
Thank you. And as far as a motion, it needs to be a motion and a seconder before we discuss it. Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Harrison.
Just two things from the 2018 Quality of Life Survey that I thought was very useful. One was there was economic activities the town should encourage. And it was basically a page of different sectors, economic sectors. Basically, right now, we have maybe the airport question for economic development. We don't really have anything. So I think just having that, we can reiterate the exact same question we used in 2018. And then it gives you feedback on which sectors of economic activity citizens want us to pursue. And that might be useful, A, for us, or B, for the private sector to know there's a demand in town for these services.
Thank you. Aren't we going through the pathway where we have a company or looking for feedback through another organization with the grant funding that we got?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So that Pathways to Sustainable Development project is underway this year. So that would be an example of another opportunity for people to provide that input. But if council wants to add it, you could make
Okay
that
with that?
motion.
All right. Councillor Young. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, the last one was just public transportation. So we had 3 questions on public transportation. I don't think we need 3, but in the 2018, it just even asked how many people use public transportation. I know the RDN collects the data themselves, but I just think that's one data set in terms of both delivery of services on a regional basis, but also climate change implementation. That's something I think we should be tracking through the quality of life survey is how many people are actively using public transportation and how many maybe would like to. I'm just thinking of the 2018 questions, just basically keep them the same, so you have the same data set moving forward.
Yeah, a comparison is good. To have the same question and see the change, how things progress is good. However, if I look at the response of that question, those buses should be full. And they're not full. There's maybe very few people on the bus. So what people say in a survey as to what they would do is not necessarily what actually happens.
In the 2018 survey, it had less than 10% of people said I use the bus. It was an overwhelming no, I don't.
Yeah.
So they were honest about how often they use the bus, but I think it's also too it's a good reminder for us of that.
Yeah.
You know, we're a small town, but this is where we're at.
But if 10% of the people use the bus, that's 900 people, and I don't think there's everyone on there. So any further questions? Councillor Young.
Going to question 12, when it refers to Council Corner, is that the public open house?
Mr. Seals? Mr. Swenson?
Thank you, through the mayor. I know the Council Corner is the publication that we put out after the council meeting to summarize the council meeting. It's emailed out using the constant contact.
Okay. That was a derivative from Horner's Corner that he used to put out. Anything else? Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment about the last section on volunteerism and how pleased I am to see this because volunteerism plays a huge or important role in enhancing quality of life in Qualicum Beach. So I think that that's wonderful that we encourage people to get involved and feel like they belong and are contributing to community.
Thank you. Councillor Young and then Councillor Harrison.
I just have one final ask. On number 14, about community engagement, what are the barriers that make it difficult for you to take part in a community engagement? Can we add the bullet, cancellation of public open house? I'm making that motion. Do we have a seconder?
Seeing no seconder, there's no motion. Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Harrison.
Just something I'm flagging. I don't actually have an answer because I don't know what a good question would be, but I just note that healthcare was very much a big issue in the last provincial election. And this would be a chance where we could ask some questions about services people might want to see in town. But that's something that requires a level of specificity that I don't really have, and I'm not sure the best way to phrase it. But just something maybe for staff over the next day or two to think about if there's a obvious question about healthcare. I know there's certain things like transportation access, so Wheels for Wellness is changing as of now. So there's certain things about maybe certain services used to rely on driving to Nanaimo you might need in our area. But I don't know if this is the right place for it. I just flag that when we're doing the quality of life survey, it's a great chance to get a lot of feedback from a lot of people that we don't usually hear from. So I'm not sure if there's a good question there, but just sort of putting that idea in staff's head. And if they have a great idea for one question, that would be lovely. If not, that's okay too.
Mr. Sales, your insight.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. There aren't any questions that are top of mind for me in terms of the provision of medical services in the town that we could add to that. Council's comments earlier about the direct jurisdiction of the town do pop into my head, and the town doesn't have direct authority over healthcare services. So I'm happy to continue pondering it, but there's nothing that immediately jumps to mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Actually, when Councillor Young was asking about question 14 and the monthly public open houses, I noticed that we do have that as one of the alternatives in question 15. And we have decided, or council now is not going to be doing monthly open houses, public open houses, so perhaps we should take that alternative out.
Yeah, we're doing the quarterly. So it's still an open house. There's no agenda. There's no minutes. It's just an open house for anybody, but it will be screened. People can watch it from home, and it will be recorded. So that's why we thought it was a better approach than doing the monthly where people didn't really know who was saying what. Councillor, Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I would just suggest that we delete the word monthly, and so it would just state public open houses.
Thank you. So that's your motion?
Yes,
Okay, so delete the word monthly.
yes.
Seconded by Councillor Skipsey. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Who else has another question? Councillor Young? Are you done? Councillor Harrison? Done? All right. Then at this point, it would be appropriate to have a motion that the proposed survey will be approved as amended for the Quality of Life Survey commencing in January 2025 and substantially as attached, but with the amendments that we've made. So could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Van der Valk, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carries. Thank you. I also have a request that before we go into committee of the whole, that we have a small 5-minute break. So if I can have a motion to have a 5-minute recess. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Skipsey, we have a 5-minute recess. Thank you. So I'll call the meeting back to order. And I have a special request. There was discussion during the Quality of Life survey, and we're not going to go through the whole thing again. But there was one item that I had a suggestion on, and as if it's okay with council, it could be by consent, that we add a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. So it was, I'll just give credit where it's due, is Tim Pritchard in the audience. And during the break, he suggested that we just add one question for healthcare, which is, do you have a family doctor or nurse practitioner? As just one question for healthcare, and then that's the only thing.
And I'll second that discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried unanimously. Thank you. So now I need a motion to evolve into the committee of the whole. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vanderwalk. We're now in the committee of the whole, and the first part is a delegation from the Historical and Museum Society. Lorraine Bell and perhaps others, come on up. David? We should push the button at the bottom. At the bottom.
Okay,
Yeah,
we're live.
We're live, yes.
Mr. Mayor, Town Council, fellow presenters, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is David Ireland, and I've been asked to speak as the president of the Qualicum Beach Museum Society, the Qualicum Beach Historical and Museum Society.
Just a moment. I hear some talking in the background. That's very kind of disrupting, so please don't. If you need to talk, please go into the hallway. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, thank you. Well, as we start our next journey around the sun together, it's early in that orbit. It's my pleasure to just briefly introduce the subject today, and that is the activities of the Qualicum Beach Historical and Museum Society. We've had a very successful year, and thanks in no small part to the great support, Mr. Mayor, you and your council representative have provided us. That's always greatly appreciated, and it motivates us to do better each year. I'm joined this morning by our museum manager, Miss Lorraine Bell, and our former president and now vice president, Mr. Chris Lemfers. Each of the council members, I think, have received a presentation in email format, and we'll review that now. So I'll ask that Lorraine, our museum manager, step to the podium, and we'd like to round out this morning's presentation with the closing comments from Mr. Chris Lemfers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lorraine?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. My name, as David mentioned, is Lorraine Bell. I'm the museum director, and we're here with President David Ireland and Vice President Chris Lemfers, and they're both longtime volunteers on our board, and I'd just like to express appreciation to them as well for the time and commitment they have to the museum and the Historical Society, as well as the other board members who couldn't be here today. So I'll present a review of our last fiscal year. So that goes from September through August. So the end of our fiscal year was August 24, and then talk a bit about our current year as well. Yeah, that's the one. So here's who we are: 2 permanent staff, myself and Cassell Reed, as well as a volunteer board of directors, about 15 weekly volunteers, and that number goes up to about 40 when we include volunteerism for special events such as Children's Day and Work Bees. So altogether, volunteers put about 1,400 hours per year at the museum, which is pretty impressive and very much appreciated. And that gets back to what you were saying, Anne, about the level of volunteerism and community spirit in Qualicum Beach. And it makes the museum a really fun place to work as well. Next slide, please. So in 2022, we had a strategic planning process. And out of that, we articulated our core values: respect, truth and reconciliation, social responsibility, and serving our community. And we also restated our mandate, which is to conserve and share the stories of Qualicum Beach. And through that process, we also, drawing from our core values and our purpose, we identified the key areas of impact we wanted to accomplish over the next 5 years or so. Next slide, please. So while in 2022, we were focused on mostly taking stock and planning, in 23 and 24, we started thinking, how are we going to put some of these plans into action? And we looked carefully at the areas of public engagement and collections management. So our goals from that were to improve accessibility, create more exhibits for the public to share in what the history of Qualicum Beach and to understand the many dimensions of that history, improve our collections management. That is just an ongoing process that we have to keep in mind, strengthen our volunteer program, and improve our learning programs. So here's some quick statistics. Last year we had a total of 3,300 visitors, and that number includes general admissions as well as school tours and special events. And that brought in about 8,000 just in door donations, which we were quite pleased about. Our busiest times are in the summer with both the visitors and locals, whereas we're less busy in fall and winter when there's fewer visitors in town. This year we decided to open on Saturdays, Saturday afternoons, October through May. And that we hope that'll impact our numbers through those quieter months as well. Next slide. I'm really sorry about the small writing on that slide. But anyway, it's a quick look at our collections. And we're basically trying to be aware of how many artifacts and belongings, archives, and fossil specimens that are now in our collection. The more we know about our collection, the better we are at managing it and sharing it with the public. And so this year, Cassell, Lucy, and Sandy are working on a comprehensive inventory so we can get more accurate descriptions of our holdings and be better able to manage and care for them. That's one, oh, sorry, just want to go back a little. There. That one photograph, I might have shared it before. It's my favorite photograph from our collection because I think Annie Crump is like the coolest historic figure we have. If I could go back in time and meet someone, it would be her. Anyway, that is Annie Crump with her shark catch. That picture was taken just off Kincaid Road. And historical evidence suggests that she was about to render it for oil for use in miners' lamps. Not sure if I've shared this story with you before, but she would fill big cans full of this shark oil and row it up to near Cumberland and sell it to the miners there. And they used to put it in their headlamps. And those lamps were called stinky lamps for that reason. So the stuff you find out with this job. Also shown there is a telegraph key that's on display at the museum right now. And that's part of our First World War exhibit that's going to be on until the end of January. If you haven't made it yet, I hope you can make it. Yeah, talking more about exhibits. I've told you before we have permanent and temporary exhibits, such as the one on the left there that Cassell created for the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. And we also have traveling exhibits from other museums, such as the one I mentioned, Fighting in Flanders. And so that's a traveling exhibit from the Canadian War Museum. And then a third kind of exhibit we have is that we collaborate with community groups. So this summer we collaborated with the QB Skaters and Skull Skates, and it was the history of skateboarding in Qualicum Beach. It was a lot of fun to put on, and I think we had a different kind of visitor coming to see it, so a lot of youth, and they were pretty excited to share, you know, how important skateboarding was to them and some of the interesting history around that. And that picture shows Trevor Ribert doing a kick flip over a Town of Qualicum Beach sign. So it's and the town was actually kind enough to share a sign that we put in the exhibit to kind of liven it up a bit, so we appreciated that. Next one. Okay, we also put two new displays on in the powerhouse. And they're kind of nice because they have a motion-acted video. So, for example, in this one, it's hydro workers putting up a hydro pole, and it's an art piece by a retired hydro worker. And then if you come close to the video, it comes on, and it shows Ed McMillan, who was the sculptor, as well as Hugh Gilmore talking about their experiences as hydro line workers. And just seeing that video gave me a lot of new respect for those workers and the very difficult and dangerous job that they had. And also, we wanted to take a note that we finished revitalizing the Notable Trees of Qualicum Beach book, and that's now on display in the museum. And it just kind of speaks to how much Qualicum Beach residents love trees and nature, so looked really good. Next one, please. Okay, so public engagement. We had 450 visitors at Children's Day, which was as always, our busiest day of the year, also our most fun day. And on the right, you see Tony Taylor and a little boy who is just fascinated with the Send a Telegram activity. And because the Myra crew came and volunteered there, and they set up an actual working telegraph station, so the kids could send telegraphs. It was pretty neat. We've continued with opening on other special days, National Truth and Reconciliation, Orange Shirt Day, Halloween and Family Day. As well, we take a table to other events such as the St. Mark's event, Beach Day, Arrowview Kids Fest, and this year the Volunteer Fair at St. Stephen's. Next slide, please. So our mandate is to collect, conserve, and share the fascinating stories of Qualicum Beach. And shown on this slide are just some of the many themes and stories we've been learning more about and sharing with the public. And I'm just wondering if anyone recognizes the building on the bottom. College Inn, yeah, Qualicum College Inn. Anyone have a guess of the year? Very good. Yeah, about circa 1976. So sometimes if we don't actually have the year of things, we have to look at context. In this case, I know the kid climbing up the hill. There's the older kid sliding down the hill, and she's got super slider snow skates, which we were allowed to wear when we were kids. Kid going up the hill is me, so I know that that was taken in 1976. Now everybody knows how old I am, so change the subject. Forward the slide, please. Thank you. Okay, I've submitted our work plan for this year, so here are, that's not the right slide. Oh, here we go. Here's a list of businesses and organizations who we work with. So local businesses have been really amazing, offering the museum discounts, providing high quality goods and services, and just being a generally great town to work with and cooperate with each other. So we try to stay as local as possible to support local businesses and organizations. Okay, next slide. Oh, here's the work plan. Okay, so this is a little bit about our coming up work plan. And so we're actually sort of halfway through because, you know, we're sort of into our fiscal, but we kind of have our meeting with you a bit later so that we have our financials prepared, and that seems to be working well. But anyway, I have submitted our work plan for this year, and these are the highlights. Apart from special openings, we're now offering with our open Saturdays something called Learning Saturdays from October through May from 1 to 4 p.m. And we really hope to encourage local families with younger children who might not have been able to make it to our usual opening hours, which used to be Tuesday, Thursday afternoons. And so far it's gone really well, and we even have some repeat visitors, so kids being excited to come every month to see what the new theme is. And we also try to have just a small learning activity for the children to do. So far we've made bat puppets. We've learned Morse code together. We've made clay ammonite models in which the kids can learn the physiology of these ancient shelled creatures. And it's all quite fun. And sometimes we bring out fossil kits that were developed by Graham Beard, so the kids can handle the fossils and look at them closely and compare to the more, the larger exhibits that we have behind glass. In December, we put out vintage toys and asked them to guess what the oldest toy was, and you'd be surprised at how fascinating they found that. Yeah, so I think with kids, they just like to have something to do, rather than just sort of looking and reading and listening. They just want to get busy and have an activity to do. So we're trying to put that out on Saturdays. It makes Saturdays a little lively, so if you prefer a quiet, peaceful time at the museum, maybe try the Tuesday, Thursday afternoon. Next one. So this is talking about our work plan in terms of buildings and grounds. And I put the first 3 bullet points on the list as things we hope to talk to with the town, and the rest of that long list is just for us to get busy to work on. So we would like to trim the branches of the hydro lines. We've got some feedback that it's sort of time to do that. And we do the gutters of the other 2 buildings, but the Powerhouse and Mac are quite high buildings, so that would be great to have some assistance in checking the gutters on those buildings. We did have a first try at invasive species removal, and it went quite well last year, so we'll be back at it again in the spring, and also removing some debris from the back area. We had a work bee last year for doing some of that, and then the town came and picked up the debris and stuff that we left out for them. And so that was great. And I think hopefully this year we'll have some wild roses instead of spurge laurel. Maybe we'll encourage some Oregon grape instead of the ivy and the broom and stuff like that. So it's a little bit of effort, but I think it's improving that issue with the invasive species. Next slide. So this is what it'll look like when we're all done with all those plants. I can't say when, but we're just working on it as we can. Next slide, please. So here are some financials, which we've submitted the full document to you. And these were prepared by Sabo and Jang. And this is showing revenues and expenditures. We were pretty close to hitting our budget, so the large number you see on the bottom also includes amortization. Next slide, please. Talking a little bit about grants, I think we're being successful in raising about $60,000 per year in sort of operational grants and revenues. And I think that's a fairly reliable number that we've reached. And then town support about $124,000, including the matching grant. So this would be not including projects we apply for as opportunities arrive. So for example, we could apply for the gaming capital grant this year, and we hope to do that for the an updated chairlift, which is time that was replaced. A little bit about Canada Summer Jobs funding. We used to have about 16 weeks for 2 students, and we're finding that program is dwindling. So now we're getting about 8 weeks for 2 students, which is still great. So we hope to supplement that with another grant program called Young Canada Works. So we're going to give that a try this year. And finally, there's a nice grant program through the Museums Assistance Program, and that funds traveling exhibitions. So we got one this year for the Fighting in Flanders from the Canadian War Museum. And what we're going to do is we're just going to apply for that every year. If we get it, we'll bring in a traveling exhibition. If we don't get it, we will not bring in a traveling exhibition. Next slide. So that's revenues. And then can we have the next slide from that? Net income. Okay, so this is our budget for this year. We decided to draw from our surplus for operational expenses. We still had a surplus from funding received through COVID funds and things like that, ever dwindling. So we decided to pull $25,000 of that towards our operational expenses this year. Next year, I think we're going to have a careful look at our spending and maybe try to increase our revenues somehow. So for example, we did apply for a $10,000 extra grant from the BC Arts Council. So we're waiting to hear for that news for next year. And that would be able to support school programs and exhibit development. So got our fingers crossed about that one. Next slide. So that's just a list of the documents that I think I've submitted that you have. Work plan, budget, last year's financials, our strategic plan. And so, always feel free to let us know if you have any questions or concerns or feedback about the work that we're doing. We always appreciate feedback from whoever's interested and has any ideas for us. Next slide. That's a beautiful photo of town residents waiting for the train in 1918. And I would just like to use that photo to wrap up, and thank you so much for your support for the museum. And we love sharing history with our community and with visitors, and we just want to thank you so much for the town council and the community for supporting our work, and wish you all a happy new year.
Thank you. Thank you for your very upbeat and detailed presentation. I also want to thank Councillor Young for your participation as our liaison to the society. And also, I know you're very busy with your store and doing all the things you do, but you always seem to be there whenever there's something happening, so I commend you for that. Any questions to the delegation? Thank you. Councillor Van der Voort.
I just had a question of interest in terms of looking at alternative ways to raise revenue. In terms of the traveling exhibits, do you ever send out exhibits? And would that be something that you would receive funding for or could receive revenue for?
We don't currently send out exhibits. Our focus and mandate is to share the stories of Qualicum Beach. So sending out exhibits elsewhere as a revenue source, I'm not sure if that would work, but we do have certain panels about particular historical themes that we have prepared and that we can share with schools, libraries, that kind of thing. So we could work on that. I'm not sure if it would be revenue, it would just be more like fulfilling our mandate to share Qualicum Beach history. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So obviously, as when I arrived this morning, everyone was all abuzz about all things federal politics because just the season. If you're unable to get, if there's, say, a change in direction in terms of the amount of funding available through grants at the provincial or federal level, would that be something you might be coming to the town? Because traditionally, we've done a fair portion amount of matching grants from other jurisdictions, and if it's just impossible, I mean, I'd understand that. That's not your fault. That's someone at the provincial, federal level making that decision. But do keep us apprised if you run into issues, because the work you do, like a lot of our nonprofits, but maybe I'm biased along with a couple other councillors, that it does add a tremendous amount of value to the community, more than just the dollars and cents. So if there is a unwelcome surprise, please let us know.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
so.
and there's another group who are represented here today, and that's the St. Andrews Lodge and Society and Cultural Society. And they had an innovative approach to paying for a ramp. I think it was a $25,000 item. And they had someone saying, I will match the donations. And I believe they got the funding. So there's a lot of local support if they know what the money is for. If it's for a specific project that would enhance the experience that people have when they come to the museum. You may want to talk to some people that are in the audience. I'm sure they don't mind me telling them, but Michael Goldman is one of them, and I'm sure you know him. And just there are different ways to connect with the community where they feel, okay, this is something I can support because it's the right thing to do, and allows them participation. It's not always an ask, it's an opportunity for them to participate financially. Thank you.
That's a great
With that,
suggestion.
we just need a motion to receive this information, and it's just a formality, but that we accept the presentation made by the museum. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vandervoog. Chris, did you want to speak?
Yeah, just one.
Okay, come to the microphone. We haven't voted yet, so you can go ahead now.
Yeah, just a couple of minutes, just to reinforce the gratitude that we have with our relationship with the town, as it's been a really big support. And at the museum, we're all about learning from the past, and we try to appeal to a broad range of folks, from children right to seniors. And one thing that's really thrills us is when we hear children looking at Rosie the Walrus. And Rosie the Walrus is our 60,000-year-old adolescent walrus that was found up on Dashwood Bluffs and in 1979. And just to see their faces and realizing that the world is bigger than the actual see it, and that's a real thrill. And other areas, in the areas of social justice that the museum has been involved with, is the example of our displays that we've had, and this was a traveling display from the Nikkei Museum on the Japanese dislocations, and that was a real success. And the way we measured that success was that there was a Japanese family from Nanaimo that wanted to have a gathering at our museum, and during the time that we're having the Japanese display, and that was really wonderful because it was a really good demonstration of engagement. Other than that, we've had displays on the environment as well. We have a permanent display on the environment that's ongoing. So I just thought I'd add some of those anecdotes to our presentation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And the issues regarding the gutters and the clearing of the hydro lines and some other invasive species removal, I would suggest that your CAO can meet with our CAO, the manager from the museum, meet with our CAO to talk about how we can accomplish that. So we didn't vote on a motion to receive this presentation, but any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. And the next item is our financial administration, and I turn it over to Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we have a follow-up from our last budget presentation on the asset management scenarios and presentation from Paul Murray. So Paul Murray will be presenting that.
You just turned it off.
Sorry, Your Worship, we just had 3 mics going. So
Oh, okay. All right. You can turn it back on, Mr.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Wanted to talk briefly because I know you still have another topic before you leave today. We'll get through this briefly as we can for you. Wanted to recap some of our asset management plan work that you've been hearing about, connect that with how that flows into this year's budget that you're looking at, and give you a sense of the 5-year capital program that's funded partially by that.
And thank you for presenting the council with a hard copy. And so follow it along and make notes on the pages that you want to ask a question later, but I'd like to go through the entire presentation and then come back for comments, and you can keep track of on your hard copy. Please proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. There we go. Just a recap of the significant inventory of assets that the town has and uses to provide service to the community. Currently, the replacement cost of those in 2024 dollars is about $360 million. Our annual replacement spending target to replace those on a regular basis is about $5.8 million, and you're currently at about $2.5 million that we fund from property taxes in the budget each year. And you can see there, you've got substantial roads and water mains, sewers, storm drains, etc. Lots of inventory, like many communities. Significant asset replacement funding has been built up by previous town councils. So the $2.5 million has taken a lot of effort through the years by previous councils, including yourselves, to gradually build that up from property taxes. That prudent long-term approach has really set you on a good footing to continue that work. But of course, you still have a gap, as most communities in British Columbia do, for a variety of reasons. But the good news with that is that it does allow you to gradually phase in trying to close that gap. And that's what we're talking about today as well. The plan that we discussed with council previously to maintain assets at the kind of same level of service and the same level of risk as you currently have, what we called our scenario 1, and I'll talk about that in a minute, really envisions a 1.3% property tax increase to the average homeowner each year for 15 years to close that gap. And the work that you've done in the past allows for that to be phased in and not crunched into a shorter period. So that's the good news, even though 1.3% isn't great, but compared to other municipalities, it's actually not bad. There are lots of communities that are grappling with 3%, 4%, 5% a year. So the previous work has allowed for this to be certainly moderate in comparison. As I say, similar experience to other local governments. A lot of assets were built in the past with senior government levels of funding. 2/3 grants for sewer and water systems were very predominant in the 70s and the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. So those assets were built with 1/3 local money and 2/3 federal and provincial money. Now you're replacing them with 100% local money. So of course, there's gradually a gap builds up over time. And lots of communities facing the similar thing. Also, inflation is significant. You've seen the last 2 or 3 years in particular with construction costs in a variety of areas, even equipment replacement. Vehicle costs are substantially increased. So all of those factors play into this. But still, the gradual phase-in of this increased investment is the approach that many are taking, and we're able to do that while we manage the risk. Just a reminder of the model we've been using to describe where our assets are at, and we use something we just call the asset health score, and it's just a way of characterizing a number, which is really about it's a combination of the proportion of your past life assets, so those are the assets that are beyond their service life. So if you have a water pipe that is supposed to last 60 years and it's now at 70, it's past life. Consumption is an indicator of how far through. So a 60-year pipe, if you're 30 years through, it's 50% consumed. So it's a combination of that which gives you a sense of how old is our inventory overall, how much past life, which is we're using as an indicator of risk. So the more past life assets you have, the greater chance there is that you have a trip and fall or a slope stabilization issue, or your road is not as nicely paved as it should be and the base starts to get undermined, things like that. And just a recap of the model we've been talking about, we think about 3 areas when we do this. We think about resiliency, which is the way to keep that level of service consistently at the level that you choose over time. So we're not bouncing up and down and being very variable. We try and be consistent at whatever scenario you choose. While we do that, we want to maintain a certain amount of money when we say flexibility, a certain amount of cash, a certain amount of debt capacity that you could access with approval. If you had an unplanned asset replacement, something came up earlier than expected, and also to fund your regular replacement. And for us in this model, we've been using a minimum of $2.5 million in our asset replacement reserve as our flexibility number, just in case you need it. Hopefully never, but you never know. We also think about affordability, of course. Keep that in mind, top of mind as you go through. And as you can see currently in 2024, annual cost to the homeowner for all of your investment replacement at the $2.5 million level, about $366 to the average homeowner out of your total $2,539 property taxes. So that's just for context. We have talked about 3 scenarios previously with council. The first scenario is the one that is being built into your budget at this point, and I know we wanted to have some conversation with you about what are the implications if instead of a scenario 1 you looked at, say, a scenario 2, which would be a 1% property tax increase as opposed to 1.3. So I wanted to give you a sense of what those implications might be. And, you know, full disclosure, this is about trying to argue for 1.3 as a minimum. We think there's factors that we would use to encourage you to stick at the 1.3 and consider increasing that in the future. So scenario 1 is keep the assets pretty similar to what they are in terms of overall condition. It's a very broad indicator, and that means your past life assets, so ones that are beyond their service life, are no more than 6% of your total, so pretty small number. And your consumption's around 50%. And that takes $5.8 million a year, ideally today, but we're not there. For general assets, because that's what all we're talking about today, not water and sewer, for just the general piece, because those are the ones funded by property taxes, you need about $4 million a year, and we're at 1.3. If you wanted to take a little more risk, and we've talked about this in scenario 2 in the past, you could, for example, increase the amount of past life assets you'd be willing to work with or live with. So instead of 6%, it's 14%. In doing that, the annual amount that we would need to spend is actually reduced by about $1 million. So instead of 5.8 drops to 4.7, or just for general fund, and general fund we're talking about roads, drains, equipment replacement, buildings, etc. 3.4 million versus 1.3. The difference to the average homeowner is instead of a $39 increase per year, it's 31. So that's your kind of the area we're talking about. Example, if you look at the beige, for example, a 6% on the first column on the left, 6% past life would mean, you know, you maybe have 6 kilometers of paved roads that are beyond their useful life. You might have 3 kilometers of storm sewers, 1 kilometer of sidewalks, etc. If you went to scenario 2, you're basically doubling that. So you would be willing to live with 15 kilometers of paved roads, 7 of storm sewers, et cetera. You can see that there. So very broad examples, but just gives you a sense of risk versus cost, and that's what we've been talking about as we go. So just to recap, $4 million is the target for general assets. We're currently at 1.3. We can get there over 15 years while we maintain the risk, so we can keep at the same risk profile by doing this, but it's an extra $39 a year each year over those 15 years. Example of an asset that this is really important for, I'm sure you're well aware of. In 2019, the road condition assessment determined that your average pavement condition for the municipality was 85, which is great. That's really quite good. That doesn't mean to say every road is exactly the same. So in this case, the piece of Highway 19A between Crescent Road West and Bay was rated at a 62, and from Bay to Memorial Avenue was at a 55. Pretty low. Certainly those were pretty close to being poor then, and we would characterize them as pretty well beyond their service life at this point. The key part of that is, and to keep in mind, when we're thinking about perhaps could we defer this, stretch it out a bit more, $4.4 million of that $5.8 million project is to replace the paving. And in road, for example, we want to replace road top on a regular basis to maintain a certain level, certain standard. If you don't do that, eventually the road base will deteriorate, and the road base would need to be replaced as well. That's a much bigger cost issue. So we always talk about spend the money on keeping your road top to a certain degree so that you don't start undermining your base. In this case, base is probably 3 times more. So instead of $4 million, you're probably needing 12 if you had to fix all of the base as well. So always a good investment to replace those things on time instead of trying to stretch them out. That one's a good example of a significant budget item that's in your 5-year capital this year. So why do we argue for the 1.3? I think it's important versus 1. Even though that's not a huge increase between the two, but substantial when you're thinking about everything else the town has to deal with. We think the 1.3% should be a minimum because those targets are going to increase over time. So you're currently $360 million to replace all of your assets today. Next year, that's going to be a little more. The following year, every year inflation will affect that. So your target is going to change. So, if you're trying to reduce the impact, you're going the wrong way, right? We need to try and keep up with inflation as well. So we think the 1.3 is a minimum. Funding estimates that we use are quite broad, and they can be impacted by changes in scope or technical regulation, those sort of things. Gives me an example is the slope stabilization work at Seacrest and Bay Street, or the restoration of the natural asset at Grandin Creek at the confluence. Those haven't been included in the modeling broadly to date because that's just a very specific example of how the scope can change. Or something with a natural asset can come up that you need to build in. So another inflationary factor because scope can change, just to keep in mind. In this year's 5-year capital, we also have a fair amount of grants and debt because we don't have enough money to do the projects that we're suggesting we need to do. If those grants are not approved, and there's several projects that would be reliant on getting grant approval, then you're left with how do you fund those? Or you put them off and you take a higher degree of risk that something will happen, as they say, a trip and fall on a sidewalk or something with a road or a sinkhole or whatever it is that may happen because that asset is beyond where it should be. And also operating costs, we know that as assets age, they take more money to maintain, and it's more or less efficient for your staff to maintain them because they got to go there more often or they spend more time maintaining. So operating costs are drivers as well, so that as your assets generally age, you will see your staff asking for additional funds to maintain the same level of service. So just keeping those broad pieces in mind. So I'll give you a sense of what happens with your asset replacement in reserve. So we have a reserve specific for this. Currently has about $3.5 million in. So the far left column under 2025, about $3.5 million. You're currently putting away about 1.3 a year, 1.3 million a year for general asset replacement. We know that should be much higher. The investment in your 5-year capital is that third line down going across. So in the 5-year capital budget this year, we're planning to use $2,461,000 in 2025, $1.8 million, $1.9 million, 1.7 and $2 million, so a total of about $9.9 million in the 5 years to help with replacement of assets, along with grants and some debt. If we were at a 1% instead of 1.3, you'll see it's the second group down. Again, starting at $3.5 million today, you'll see the closing balance over the 5 years is about, $400,000 less if we're at 1%. What that means is we're going the wrong way. Even at the 1% level, that reserve is being depleted, and it's still below the minimum balance that we would like to have ideally. So, $380,000 less is available for asset replacement over the 5 years at the 1% level. In 2029, your annual contribution is about $150,000 less per year. So at that point, you've got $150,000 less ability to replace assets than you would have at the 1.3 level. So just point of this is saying, you're going that way, we'd like to go this way. So the points I've just been making, reducing the proposed increase from 1.3% per year to 1 will eventually delay individual asset replacement projects and increase that risk a little bit, but gradually over time, as opposed to maintaining it at the current level that you see today. The asset replacement reserve, as I talked about, will be reduced more. The important point to remember is that deferring the replacement of an asset today, so when you look at the 5-year capital, if you said, well, can we stretch that HVAC replacement out 5 years? Or can we stretch? By doing none of those affects the amount of money that we need to put into the reserve each year, because it's a broad, one individual project does not affect the overall. And when you think about, you have $360 million worth of assets to replace, even at, if every asset was going to last 100 years, that would be $3.6 million a year. And we're not at that level. So even if you think it very simply, because our assets aren't going to last 100 years, right? So that 3.6 is a low number. It's actually 5.8, right? So that tells you that that number is real, and it's a target we need to get to eventually over time. The only way to reduce that, I think, is to actually eliminate some inventory. I don't think you have the choice to eliminate some water system or sewer system or roads or drain. Buildings, maybe there's some, I don't know, that one day maybe you don't need everything you have. Equipment and vehicles, generally speaking, there's sometimes right-sizing, and I know your fleet has been right-sized, and maybe there's some little bit of work there, but small piece of this puzzle. So really, reducing assets doesn't seem to be a large opportunity here either. So broad picture, 1.3%, we'd argue for that council adopts as its approach. That doesn't mean it's approved forever. What it means is it guides staff each year, and it would come back in your budget each year and be reported out, and you still get to choose each year in your budget whether or not you want to live with that for that year. Hopefully you keep that discipline and you keep that 1.3 or a little bit more going each year. So how does this flow into the 5-year capital? In the budget document the draft document that's being prepared that you've seen, there's about $43 million in replacement of existing assets, pretty substantial and significant capital program. Some large projects in there. This doesn't include water and sewer again. Those are funded through utility charges, so we're just focusing on property tax today. You can see that's transportation, drainage, facilities, parks and trails, airport, and vehicles and equipment. So how do we fund that $43 million? Well, there's about $9.8 million from the asset replacement reserve, and that's just what I was talking about. That's funded from these contributions each year. There's grant funding of $19 million built in, pretty well all subject to approval, so there's some risk there. And you also need some debt financing, again, all subject to approval and lots of process to get there, but in terms of broad funding approach. And the remainder of the funding is, there's some small parts from development cost charges and community amenity charges. So the risk piece there is there's a significant amount of grant and debt. Remains to be seen if those come through. But in terms of a broad financial tool, that's what's included in here for the 5 years. In addition to that, because we separate, this screen we were just talking about is just asset replacement. We're not talking about additional assets, right, over and above when you want to add to your inventory. So the new expanded or upgraded assets, you also have about $17 million in your proposed 5-year capital. I'm making the point that asset replacement funding is not used to finance new assets, expansion, or upgrading to improve service. We always want to try and separate that so we don't rob from the asset replacement pot to build new assets, because we're making it worse by doing that. So a bit of discipline in approach, and that's what we're trying to do through the budget process. Again, deferring these projects doesn't impact the target, the 1.3% that we're trying to build our approach around. And just to remember that adding new infrastructure will increase our future replacement costs. So this is another factor in looking at how much we need to fund replacement by, because once you add these, we then have to think about replacement. Even though it may be 30, 40, 50 years down, may not be a significant one, but if we add assets every year, we are also going to gradually increase that requirement. So nothing different to any other municipality in the province. So I'll give you a sense of what's included for replacement. These are just the replacement parts. So transportation, sorry, the tables are a little bit small. I know there'll be copies available. Significant one is the 19A Memorial to Crescent Road West and traffic calming. There's about, I think it's about 5.8 million of the total. About 4.4 of that is for replacement. There's also some traffic calming and some other additional in there. Primrose Street is the other for paving, and there's Butterball Slope that's included, and then a general contingency that staff keep in each year. Risk factor is that there's significant grants included as a potential funding source for that, and if those grants don't come through, you'll have to have a discussion about how you fund those and how they proceed. Drainage, there's a list. You can see Seacrest Road, slope stabilization, pretty significant, 2.6 million. Eagle Crest Drive, those two are also grant dependent. Schoolhouse Creek tributary is also grant dependent. And then there's a variety of other smaller ones, and the Grandin Creek confluence at the bottom. So it gives you a sense of the drainage work. Pretty substantial amount of work involved in the 5 years. Facilities and parks, trails replacement. You've got general facilities maintenance at all facilities, which could be an HVAC there. It might be a roof replacement. It's significant building components. You've got discussion and a place marker there for your operations workplace modernization. There's a substantial needs assessment that needs to be done on that, but regardless of the direction that's taken, there's substantial money needed there for workplace modernization, one way or the other. Parks and trails, the large one is the skate park that's there. Vehicle and equipment, equipment and vehicle replacement generally is 700, 800, 900,000 a year, depending on when the vehicles are coming due. You've got fire department apparatus there in 2026, and a variety of smaller items here and there, but primarily it's equipment and vehicle replacement and fire department. And lastly, the airport, significant one is the runway, taxiway, and apron asphalt overlay. That's pretty well entirely dependent on a grant, as is the loader and snow blower replacement. Those two would only go forward if the grant's received, and those are one of the few areas where grants seem to be a little easier to come by. Regular asset replacement is sort of not the flavor, really, of provincial and federal governments anymore. It's about other areas, whether it's disaster response or climate resilience or a variety of other, it could be a variety of pieces, but replacing that regular water pipe or that sewer line or the road paving, less priority, but remains to be seen if you can get them. And that's it, Your Worship. Just gives you a sense of what's in the capital program, hopefully how it connects to the need to really work on the great progress that you've made to get to the 2.5 million a year level, because you really need to keep doing that, and successive councils, because this isn't a 1 year. This is thinking about, this is based on a 30-year planning horizon for asset replacement and trying to gradually get there over 15, and that's the longest period we could stretch it to. I mean, if you want to be ambitious and really committed, you could go more than 1.3 and shorten that time frame up. But we think 1.3 is pretty reasonable and very consistent, if not on the low end of other communities that are trying to do the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the delegation? Councillor Harrison.
Just if I may, Your Worship, through the chair to Mr. Hare. So correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that when we have reserves, there's a modest amount of revenue we generate essentially through investments. Like essentially we get a very modest amount of money through our reserves. So if we go to one of the lower numbers where we're essentially cannibalizing our reserves to pay for projects, not only are you, hey, you have less reserves to pay for projects, but you're also eating away into potential revenue stream, modest though it may be. I'm completely wrong. Please correct me, Mr. Hare, because I'd hate to be wrong on something like that.
I'll take that one, Mr. Mayor, if that's okay. In the model, there are two parts. We don't build in inflation because trying to guess at what inflation is 15 years out, you kind of assume away your problem, because everybody assumes, 2% inflation, and we've seen that doesn't necessarily work. We also don't include interest revenue on the reserves. What we say is come back each year to council, update all your projections each year, and talk to council about how they change. And so that reserve balance will adjust. Honestly, up until recently, reserve fund interest has been pretty darn modest. Interest rates are pretty low for that sort of thing. And in the model, because we've tried this in the past, it makes very little difference to the numbers. And the issue with the reserve is really, the point I was trying to make was, when we talk about our flexibility, which is the town's ability to immediately jump on fixing something that breaks in an unplanned way, you want to have a bit of cash and perhaps some debt if it's really substantial. Keep that available, that tool in your toolbox, so that you can do that. And we think the 2.5 million, give or take, is a pretty good number. That's why I said at the 1% tax increase level, you can see, right, your reserves. And if you want to maintain a certain amount of money in there, what you end up doing is stopping replacing assets or reducing them. So you still keep a small amount of reserves there, but you start stretching out. You're physically, you have to stretch out, which means you take more risk. So what we're saying is at the 1.3, focus on managing your risk at the same level. Not so much about the reserve balance, although try and keep it above that minimum. But try and do both of those, and then that'll keep your stability and your risk pretty good for the future.
Councillor Young.
I'm just wondering, if we had some new larger builds, would that help with money towards infrastructure? Would any of that give a more positive reduction to what we need right now?
Through the chair, if you're talking about new construction each year, so new property tax revenue from new construction, the general answer is it'll help with your budget overall, however you choose to use it. So if, for example, you get 1% new assessment each year, which is a lot of communities around that. The faster growing are 2, 3, maybe even 4%. Some communities choose to use a proportion of that towards new assets. The rest is built into the budget because honestly, as you'll have seen, your operating budget is also, difficult because inflation is quite high, and even simple things like your insurance premiums they're not inflationary increases. You've probably experienced this at home, or if you have a boat with your marine insurance. it can be 20, 30%. So I know from an operating standpoint, staff will struggle away at trying to balance all of those. New construction really helps take the edge off that increase in property taxes for operating. It can also help with replacement, and then some communities also think about a portion of it to go towards new inventory and new, if you're trying to add another pathway in a park or another skate park or another sidewalk somewhere. So it's not an easy answer. It's a question of priorities between all of those.
Any other questions? Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, if I may. Just through the chair to staff, I know there's been years of work going into this. When you look at basically the first page where it talks about $360 million worth of assets, there's so many things to track. Are there any unknowns that we still have in terms of either like stormwater infrastructure, say our seawall, some certain pieces of our built infrastructure where we don't have all the information yet? And again, I don't want to discount the fact that there's been a ton of work to even get here.
I can certainly answer. I know what I think staff would say as well, is absolutely. There's always more work to do to refine. And this is a high level, broad take. That's why I was alluding to things like the slope stabilization work. That's not something that would have been originally anticipated, because the road in the area, you'd anticipate replacing the road, not the fact you have to stabilize the slope as well. So you're always going to get those. There's substantial work, I would say, for the next 3 to 5 years to cycle through each area of inventory and make the data better. And that means looking at each asset record and really thinking about it and thinking about have we captured what we need to. So that's another risk issue where likelihood some of those costs will increase when you really take a closer look. So more to hear on that. Wouldn't be surprised if you hear from staff in the next 2 to 3 years. Well, we cycled through this, and this is what we learned. And there's a little more cost in these areas as a result.
And just to follow up, I'm going to allow Mr. Director of Engineering, Ms. Dickinson, any comments?
Paul did a great job there. I don't really have much to add, except that revisiting it every year will be important, and that every year we'll have better and better data. This year, for instance, we had a young engineer go around and collect a lot of our stormwater infrastructure, which is probably where we're weakest on what we know. And so they picked up manholes, they picked up culverts that we didn't know we had in our system. So we'll be doing that every year as we do this to get better information, and also as we do more and more projects, because the other unknown is things that are under the ground, like water mains. You can't really check until you dig it up. So as we replace old water mains, we'll get a better sense of how long we can expect our water mains to last, because we do have several, about 30 kilometers of AC water main, which probably has about a 15 to 25 year shelf life.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Murray. The next item is, I think what would be fair to our financial administrator, that we would kind of indicate our preference, whether we want to go with the lower risk or higher risk. I think the presentation was basically based on the fact that we would go where we are now, which would be the 1.3%. Unless council has a different view, perhaps we should indicate that that's the direction we should take. Councillor Skipsey.
Well, when we were having our budget discussions, we had talked about staff coming back with what 6.6 tax increase looks like. And I think that asset replacement was part of that. So without having knowledge if there's other areas or if that was on the table for cutting, I don't want to predispose that or predetermine that what staff is going to come back with.
I believe currently we are looking at 1.3 as far as replacement.
We're working on the budget right now, and I mean revisions to the budget after the last run through with council, and we are working towards building in a 1.3% increase for asset replacement with a maximum cap of a 6.6% increase.
Yes, we want to stick with a lower level of risk. That's where we're going. Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, if anything, I would argue that maybe 1.3 isn't quite enough. I think 1.3 makes sense. If we're going to be looking at reducing taxes, it might be new things, I mean, we'll have that conversation as a council at a future regular council meeting, but it'd be new infrastructure that we're building in this year that we might want to push back a year or two. But I think when folks think about the operation of local government, by the way, thank you very much for sitting through this. This is the most important presentation basically in the calendar year. This is what people expect us to do, and Qualicum Beach has a long tradition of a high quality of infrastructure. So I think if we're going to deviate from that, there should be a lot of public input on it.
Yes, so thank you, but I think what I'm hearing is we stick to the level that we currently have, which is the lower risk, based on the chart.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, then our last item of the agenda. By the way, on the financial planning, are there any comments from the gallery? If you want to make a comment now, or if you want to write us your comments, because there's a lot of information here, and also for time-wise, we would welcome your feedback through emails or otherwise, so we can get some feeling whether you think we're on the right track with the way we're proceeding based on the presentation we got today. Okay? If not, we're going into the presentation regarding the Memorial Avenue permit, or at least the discussion about that, and the presentation. So with that, Mr. Darush Ferusli, come on up.
To the worship and councillors, thank you for having us. I will first introduce basically we're going to do both presentation. Mr. Jeff Finley, developer owner group of the project. So the projects we are presenting today, it's located at the Triangle property at Memorial Corner and the Hoy Lake Road. It is very important land, I believe, at the town. As you see, it has a view over the golf course and the water. This is a closer look, shows the property with few trees and the neighbors at the other side. Sorry.
Do you mind just stepping back a little bit so that it's more picked up in the mic?
Okay, sure. Yeah, sorry about that. And the neighbors at the Hoy Lake Road, there is a couple of ranchers and one two-story building. The next slide. This shows the view of the proposed project at the Hoy Lake Road. Couple more pictures. The projects include the two buildings, basically, apartment building, sorry, goes faster, apartment building and with 60, have a 60 unit in the back, and also 20 hotel, motel type of the style units. These are a few more pictures. As request of the planning department, we did draw a couple of the sections through the property over the Hoy Lake Road, and also the water. 3 sections goes through there. Here is what we're showing here. The blue area is the water, basically, and then increase. The property obviously has a big slope. These are the contour lines will be dropped very fast. So in this picture, we're showing 2-story building above the underground parking. Will have the same effect as the 5-story. Basically, the partial view, the units property in the Hoy Lake they have, it will have the same effect. You do build 2-story or 5-story. It will be basically gone. So here is the comparison in data sheets. What we're proposing is exactly line up with the existing zoning, which you can build hotel, motel, and apartment building. By existing zoning, you can build up to 42 units, apartment building. We are proposing 60. And then also you can build a motel size, which we do have 20 of those. Overall, we are providing 83 parking, including underground and above the ground. So this is the diagram shows the Holy Lake is coming mostly flat and then drop very fast. This is our underground parking. We are using the drop area to basically to go to the underground parking. And we have few above ground, and those are the motel type of the units proposed. It's basically 10 in the main floor and with the stairs going up for another 10. The majority of all the units we are proposing in this project, they are 2-bedroom. Based on our experience in East Village project, it's demand for more 2-bedroom units. That's what we have in here. Typical floor units and elevation. We are using the material of the project. We are using cementitious board panel and also some artificial looks, wood type of the looks in the building. To creating the little bit variety on the building, we also little bit sliding the decks. Oh, again, too fast. Go back, one more. Yes, we are sliding the basically decks and also providing some wood privacy panels to make sure those decks, they are not looking at each other as much. So it's very simple, modern looks of the building. Similar online with what we have in the East Village. That's again a more view we talked. Yeah, I keep the presentation very short to leave more time for questions may have for me. So one thing I would like to basically mention, the project, earlier conversation in which I was very impressed about the OCP and the questionnaire with the very detailed comment for all the consultants, all the counselors. It shows the very involving community is a very good thing to do. I'm working from Victoria all the way to the Camp River, many community, and I see the OCPs keep changing. Affordability and densifying is big item in all these community. I'm pretty sure you guys know about that more than anyone. So is raising the density in here is coming with the OCP. It is that type of the density or not, I'm not sure, but it's coming for all the community. And being affordability, cost of the land per unit is a big part of that. So if you're building for the dividing basically share of the land for each unit much higher. And when you're building bigger building, your construction costs coming lower too. So these are always help to basically having the successful project. So that's I think is the main conversation here, density of the project. Thank you very much, and I'm ready for...
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be some questions. I just want to clarify to the gallery about the opportunity for public input. Perhaps Ms. Svensson can articulate what the deal is with that?
Thank you. Through the Mayor Westbrook, I'll turn it to the Director of Planning, Luke Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the primary purpose of receiving this delegation today is to ensure that the council has a chance to hear directly from the applicant's agent and also interact, answer any questions that the council may have. So in terms of public input, because of the provincial legislation, the province has prohibited the town from holding a public hearing for applications that are in compliance with the OCP. And so the question has been asked, at what point is it determined whether an application is fully in compliance with the OCP? So that question hasn't been answered. It's council that makes that determination. So to this point, it has not been made. However, because today's meeting is not a decision-making meeting, council needs to keep its options open, which means not having public input at this point. So just to clarify, council will have an opportunity at the future to clarify for certainty whether or not it's OCP compliant. That today is just to receive a delegation directly. Thank you.
Thank you. So that clears up that point. I have one question. When you go to the earlier presentations, there are these round barrels.
Oh,
They look like these were the ones that used to be at Pheasant Glen, where they get actually sleeping units. What are they?
these are the saunas, dry saunas. Basically, if this project move ahead, we will have a full landscape design type of the items. Basically, the idea is the area in the back is basically work with these motel and hotel type of the units. They can have some sort of the sauna type of the amenity at the site.
Well, thank you. Councillor Van der Valk, you go ahead.
Thank you. I did actually have a question about further clarification about the OCP compliance. So I'm not quite clear on the answer that Mr. Sales gave. If it's not already compliant with the OCP, if that's a council decision, then why are we limiting public input, or why are we not having a public hearing at this time if we don't know that it is OCP compliant or not?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Van der Valk. So, you know, in the big picture, we're trying to improve the transparency and efficiency and effectiveness of our development process. So we talked a lot about that last year. So a continual improvement here, and we are learning about these provincial changes and you know, still developing the best practices. However, the important point is that at this point in a process, council hasn't considered any aspect of it. This is the first time council has considered it. So if council received public input at this meeting, then council would no longer have the option of considering it to be OCP compliant. And the decision could therefore at some point in the future be challenged on the basis of a procedural unfairness. So that's why there's no public input today. A decision to allow public input or allowing public input today would force council into a de facto decision that it's not OCP compliant, and that's not a decision that's been made. Keep in mind that this process, where council has a chance to hear directly from applicants, is one that will be repeated in the future. And some of them may be OCP compliant. Some of those applications may not be. But at this point in the process, council should keep its options open. And so that means not allowing public input.
Councillor.
So in considering that this build will be OCP compliant, any build that is on this main artery of Memorial that leads into town, in our OCP, we asked for something that is a Qualicum Beach vibe, a little more iconic. And I'm seeing it, and I've heard from many residents that this is a block, pretty much a bland block. And it's been compared to just another apartment build like on Disbard Street in Parksville. So would you be open to doing some more design work to make it just more special for Qualicum Beach?
I'm pretty sure developer will be open to to revise as direction of the councils. But it's my experience is having the modern and simple building is always work with everything. So, but yes, as I believe this can be something basically as a direction of the councillors and mayor to the developer and to reconsider. This is rezoning application and not DP application. Usually form and character is work at the DP application, not at the rezoning.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderwalk.
The surrounding neighborhood is almost exclusively one-story, single-family properties. And actually on your photo that you had, your aerial view photo, you show a large stand of trees on the east side of the site, which no longer are there. There are two newer single-family homes right beside the site. Keep going. It's the very last page that we have. Next one. There we go.
The picture we basically use in here. We just went to the map. Excuse me, through the mayor and councillors. The picture we use in here is from Google Map. Is obviously old. The area we were talking about here, and yes, there are single-family home. Majority of the neighbors, they are single-family home, but these property already zoned for hotel and apartment building, and existing zone is allowed to build 42 apartment building.
Correct. You are asking for the existing zoning is for commercial 9, C9, 78 hotel rooms, or 39 apartment units is what we're seeing on our chart here, and also a height of 75 or 7.5 meters, and you are asking for 20.65 meters, which is 2.75 times increase in height. So my point is, you're surrounded by single-family homes and don't seem to have made any attempt to fit into the neighborhood. So you could probably regain that same density if you had lower buildings or a couple of lower buildings that were better sitting on your site rather than just one at the very top in a very residential area and one along Memorial Drive. Perhaps you could look at spreading the buildings out a bit more, or some of the units, or stepping down so that the building still provides density but doesn't impose and impact the neighborhood so negatively.
Basically through the mayor and the councillor, yes, the building can be more spread, but in overall, in order to achieve what allowed at existing zoning, even in existing zoning, we have to be the block. We cannot be, basically if you're building the duplexes or triplexes, it still is not enough land to go up to the 42. You can build it maybe maximum 20 unit there, and with the interior. And it's very challenging because of the topography of the land is dropping fast. So it will be a building at the Whole Lake Road, sorry, and the lower portion. Again, triangle, a slope, all these factors on the design of the building is also did consider the best location for getting the best basically the view. We are putting the building at the south part of the property, which means shading of the building will be effect on any most of the surrounding building, especially in Whole Lake, because of the sun is coming south, west, south to east, south. So this was the third, actually, the try for us to, for design of this building. We have a couple of two other options. I'm pretty sure during the years they had more design in that property bring up to the councilors. Again, is the number of the units and the density make the project successful for bringing the more affordable and more unit to the city. That's how we approach the project. It used to be smaller, but again, the developer, builder did their maths, and they didn't think that's actually working. So it's reality of today's market is much different than 4 years ago. We used to build projects like apartment building, $100 per square foot. Those days gone. This was like 15 years ago. Now we're talking about I don't want to talk about the money. I'm pretty sure it's not concern of the councilors, but there is reality of the today world. It's cost between $300 to $400 per square foot. So it's make the projects work and successful. This is the route we took. But again, as other comment I got, this direction, it comes from councilor. We can take it to the developer and owner and work around that and see if it works or not. So that's basically how the reality of today works. Even works for BC Housing and government. I have 15 projects for BC Housings. In last 8 years, we built 10 of them. 2024 was rough day for BC Housing projects. 5 of my projects is hold because people at BC Housing didn't have money to build. They have to wait to the 2025 election pass to make sure which government coming to the fact that, sorry, I'm talking about this one. This is the honest word from my side. And 2 of those projects hoping to start 2025. So it's not just the private sector, is BC Housing and government sector also struggling with the cost of the land, cost of the construction, and affordability.
Follow up? Go ahead.
I can follow up on that. What I'm suggesting is then that you look at alternatives, that perhaps you look at 2 or 3 buildings. We did have a project, the town had a project on College Road, that had a number of buildings on a site that's smaller than your site, that they had quite a good density. So I would suggest that you could look at having smaller, lower buildings situated better on the site. This is a very valuable site to the town of Qualicum Beach because it is the entry into the town from the water, and it deserves a very thoughtful design and a design that the town is comfortable with. So that would be my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Skipsey.
Thank you. I have a number of questions, some of you and some of staff. The first being if there would be a traffic study required if this were to go ahead.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. That hasn't been determined yet. So this is just the first review. Staff will do a more detailed review in an upcoming staff report. We would have recommendations such as potentially a traffic report.
Okay. Okay. I just note that because that intersection at Hoy Lake and Memorial is not always the easiest intersection to navigate. And if I remember correctly, when it was the Georgian, the traffic came off onto Memorial directly, not onto Hoy Lakes. But I think there should be a lot of thought and consideration that goes into that. I had a couple of questions about...
The architect would like to speak.
sorry.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you.
Sorry, I will respond that this is very standard to city to request for traffic study or shadow study or these things.
Right.
So it's very normal to do this type of the studies.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the proposal, it talks about apartment buildings, and I just wondered if these were proposed to be rentals or condos, or if that decision had been made.
At the moment, the idea is to be condos, but that's again to review with the developer. But at the moment, the vision for the developer is we are providing short-term, basically motel, hotel type of the units. Basically, that is the short-term rental, if you consider, and then condos.
Okay. So that the motel part would not be our traditional definition of a motel that would have a lobby where people would check in and...
The idea, maybe,
Sorry about that. So as you well know...
Would you state the name for the record?
Sorry, Jeff Windley. As you know, the QBI and the QBO are pretty much the two main hotel-style rentals. The operators would use these buildings as an extension. They would use the QBI, the QBO, and send people up that way, and would be integrated into that whole kind of grouping. So that's how they would be dealing with the rental end of those units.
Okay. Okay, just to follow up on that, in Qualicum Beach, over the years, we've lost a lot of tourism accommodation, and like the current zoning allows 78 units. What's being proposed is 20 units. Maybe the neighbors are happy about that, but personally, I would like to see us replenish some of our tourist accommodation. And I guess my other comment is around the height, and I understand the desire to maximize views, but by doing this, the proposal puts the large building at the highest elevation and essentially sort of looms over the neighborhood. And I just think that I'd like to see more consideration of and even embrace the topography of the site. And I guess the only other thing is, you know, the development permit area that it's currently under, the area C6, talks about this particular site promoting the charm of Qualicum Beach, and that buildings shall avoid massive building components in favor of smaller village scale character and design, and that height could be a challenge, but that height variances would be entertained, particularly if a portion of the building that is subject of the variance assists in enhancing the village character and architectural interest of the building. So I'm not sure that what's being asked for actually complies with that part of the current development permit. But those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Would Mr. Ferrucci like to comment on that?
Well, I do have a couple of quick conversations around that. I guess it depends on what is deemed to be the charm or the character of it. We know that there is a lot of the Bavarian style stuff, but we learned through our previous experiences with the council and the community. To us, we felt that it was more geared towards providing the housing that's needed. Through our current experiences and market research, we're finding that there's a big demand for this type of product. Now, Qualicum Beach does not have a lot of land of this nature and this size that will accommodate the housing demands that are being requested. We are finding that the current residents, as they age out, are looking to find homes that are smaller, more manageable, more secure, and we feel that the product that we're turning through our experiences at East Village and even through the rental product is that it's all 2-bedroom. We've got a handful of 1-bedrooms in our rental product, but the feedback is they want 2 bedrooms and they want the security. So we only have a handful of sites that would accommodate this kind of densification. We have experienced and gone through the steps to try different products and different configurations on site. And as Dariush kind of mentioned, it gets hard to put multiple buildings on a site and keep some openness and open space type stuff. If you're worried about height on this building, we can mitigate the height a bit by pushing the building more into the ground, which creates more retaining walls at the front, which we're willing to do and experience and play with. But we feel that the town and the community, with the numbers that we've been reached out to for accommodations, this is a product that is being wanted. Now, we can make it more aesthetically pleasing, yes. And as Dariush mentioned, we can work through that through the DP process.
Mr. Ferrucci.
Thank you very much again to the mayor and the councillors. Yeah, this is a rezoning process. Basically, the conversation, I believe, is about the density and the height, and not the design, actual design. So, and any direction, basically, the councillors and mayor, you have basically, we have to take it back and do the look at that, and then come back with our proposal. But I think I think we are talking about the density, and this is the density we do looking for, adding instead of 42 apartment building to 60, or that's the big question. It needs to be considered.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Just through the chair, either to the province or staff, is this area subject to any sort of archaeological considerations?
I believe not, but...
Just because if we're going to spread out more, that would be one concern. If we're entering into archaeological areas, that could really have a huge impact. So I attended the Chamber of Commerce Christmas get-together at the QBI, and the proponent for this was there, says, look what I've submitted on his smartphone. And he mentioned one thing in passing that I found very interesting, which I was, oh, okay, I guess you submitted that. But he mentioned that at the East Village, pretty much everyone who's moved in is from Qualicum Beach. Is that correct?
Correct. Basically, they do have a large number of the local people looking for alternative things, and all the 2-bedroom rentals or condo, as far as I understand, is already spoken on, and large list of the people basically they left out. 1-bedroom, they are few, like 1-bedroom still looks like available. That's why we changed this project a couple of times. We had originally 50-50, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom. We changed it to 2-bedroom.
So I do think that there's some discussion about density massing and some of those more DP-focused conversations. I think there's conversations there. But more broadly for land use, I think we do have to recognize there's a finite number of spots where you can actually do density. The other thing I would, just to be a little bit critical of this council for one thing, if we say it's surrounded by single-family homes, when this council a year ago turned down a duplex just down the road, maybe it's to some extent our own fault that it's only single-family homes in the area. So I do think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we have targets that are set. We should be trying to meet them. This would go a long way, and there's only 2 big projects, and the other one, if I can, maybe it's inappropriate, but I think the other one needs even more work than this. This has, it needs a little bit of fine-tuning and some back and forth, but I think there's, the general idea of doing something there makes sense. I think when you look at the existing zoning saying, well, if you built only hotel units, you'd get roughly the same number of units at the end of the day and roughly the same site coverage. The question is just more, where do you situate the building? What's the total height? How do we, you know, it's probably gonna be more than was originally zoned for, but it's maybe gonna be less than this proposal, and then how does that work? I don't have the answer for that, but I do think this is something where we do actually have a lot of folks who are looking to downsize. It's a very large demographic in Qualicum Beach, and I don't know if we're approved enough right now to meet that demand. So I think there's hopefully something we can work forward to. The only other thing I'd point out too is that there's always give and take. So if we ask for more aesthetics and more beauty, that drives up the cost to build. So then there's other things we can ask for. So we might want to consider things like, just for the benefit of the public, we had a get-together with the fire hall a few weeks ago. And their most recent, they do a ton of outreach at like farmers market and in the community to try to do recruitment. The most recent recruiting class was 2 people. You have to live in Qualicum Beach to be a volunteer firefighter. You can't live in the RDN, you can't live in Parksville. So I know this isn't a rental property per se, but in the East Village, there's a couple of units that are allocated for firefighters at below market rates. There's another conversation too where maybe it might be beneficial to the building for some of the septuagenarians who are looking to downsize to know there's a firefighter down the hall in case there's a fire. So maybe something like that too where there's a benefit for the town. But again, this is a give and take. It's just committee of the whole. Nothing is solid, but hopefully we can look at something where we do address some of the aesthetic elements. I agree with the other members of council who said that, you know, we can maybe do a little bit better. I'm thinking of Pheasant Glen, where their first iteration was a giant wall in the middle, and then they did a new version, which was a little bit better. And I think there's some iteration here. But the general idea, which I think is what the mayor's asking for and staff are looking for, generally, there's something here that we can work with, and I hope we can move that forward.
You know, that's a couple of good examples of what you said, and I don't think it's helpful to talk about what the council approved in the past as far as a duplex. I don't think that's helpful. But the comment about Pheasant Glen, where we had an iteration of a design for the lodge and the clubhouse, restaurant, all that, we turned that iteration down. And we got criticized for that. But then we came up with a new iteration, and people said, this is great. So sometimes we are critical because we're looking at the long-term effect. That building, if it gets built, will be there a lot longer than any of us. So we're looking at the character of the town, and as you know, observed so accurately, that when we do a quality life survey, people are asked in detail, what do you expect council to do as far as future development? And there's a very strong feeling about the height of buildings, about fitting the character of the town, respect the history of the town. So I remember, and I look at the name on top there, the Sunset Inn. I remember when there was a Sunset Inn, and it was a mess until we said, okay, we're offered to rezone it if you take it all down. And so we did that, and the building got taken down because it was a real nightmare for that to stay there with tarps and everything. But then we had a presentation from another architect about what could be done there, and it was very well received. So perhaps we can look at what was approved before. And I think there was 45 condos spread out and 2-story. So it was more in line with what I thought the community wanted. So this is something different, and we'll have to take a serious look at it. But I appreciate your coming here today and being so open about how we may be able to mitigate some of the concerns that have been mentioned today. So I really appreciate that. Councilor Young.
I really appreciate the density that you're trying to incorporate. I'm just wondering, following up with Councilor Harrison's comment, are we doing anything for like help towards the people that are needing housing assistance? Are you making any kind of allotment in that area?
That is something regarding the operating of the project. I'm pretty sure developer, they're looking for higher, basically, end services for the people that are living there. We have lots of amenity, but regarding operating, I have no information to pass on.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilor Vandervalk.
Yeah, this may not be the correct place to make this comment, but I'll make it anyways. There is a very large and beautiful arbutus tree right on Hoy Lake Road, pretty much where you want where your proposal has the entry. And have you taken any of the natural assets into consideration?
Bruce Lee, would you put your microphone on again, please?
I believe the tree you are referring is close to the mailbox. I'm not sure is this one or other one.
The arbutus tree, so that is the one more in the center?
That's the one?
Yep.
So yes, for sure, we will work around that to see if we can save that one. Or yeah, it's at the moment is not considered to keep.
Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, thank you, Mr. Rougi and Mr. Winley, for coming today. And we'll continue to work with the community. As far as public hearings, we can't have those, but, and I'm sure you're already doing that, is sending written communications about this project. We already received some, and that is entirely appropriate as far as the legislation concerned. Council can receive comments in writing, just not having the public hearing format. So thank you.
Thank you for all the councillors. And
thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that concludes the agenda. Unless, well, no, I think we should wrap it up. I think we've spoken to each one, the Finance Administration, the Historical Society. I think we're done as far as input. Ms. Svensson?
Yes, we'll just need a motion to rise out of committee of the whole and then a motion to adjourn.
Right, so a motion to rise out of committee of the whole, go back in the open, back in the council, in the regular council or special council meeting forum. Councillor Van der Walt, Councillor Harrison. Discussion, all in favor, opposed if any? Okay, thank you. And there's nothing to rise and report as far as I could tell. So a motion to Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I just wonder if staff want us to rise and report on the quality of life survey.
The quality of life survey was done in the special council meeting, so
Yeah.
it's done.
So that was extremely public. Yeah, it's a while ago. Okay, so a motion to adjourn would, yes, Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, Your Worship, just to the point you raised after the financial where you asked us if we were comfortable with the 1.3.
Yeah.
Would that be beneficial for staff if we actually made a recommendation for committee of the whole for the 1.3 target?
Well, thank you, because that's exactly what I was hoping we would do, to give some indication of where we stand. So if you would like to make a motion that we would go in the direction that was being recommended, that's the 1.3%.
If you don't mind, Your Worship, I'd like to make that motion. Thank you.
Councillor Skipsey seconding. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed or carried? Well, there's your direction. That's what you were looking for. And I think with that, I want to thank council. And I repeat, I heard some comments today about, I thought about going this, but after hearing the discussion and thinking about it some more, I've changed my mind. That is wonderful. You don't hear that very often in other levels of government. They seem to stick to it no matter what. And I think this council is a wonderful example of having a very democratic feel and the sense of comfort that you can disagree with each other and also being open to change your mind. So I really commend council and staff to work with us on that. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Van der Walt, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.